All right. Hello, everyone. This is Tyler James with Comics Launch. And today I have a great interview for you. Something I think you're going to like this one. My guest today is a Spokane, Washington based comic book writer who's been telling stories for about as long as he can remember. He's the creator of Vampire Detective in Space, Modern Mythology, and the Unicorn Vampire Hunter series, which have all been successfully funded on Kickstarter. Welcome to Comics Launch, Caleb Palmquist. How you doing today, Caleb?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here as well. I know you've got a project that is live on Kickstarter that I'm excited to talk to you about. Your current launch is for the latest Unicorn Vampire Hunter, number 1 through 5. This is your 10th Kickstarter that you've launched, and it seems like a culmination of a lot of the lessons that you've learned over the years are contributing to what is tracking to be your best launch yet. So to not bury the lead, can you tell us about this book and project?
Yeah, sure. Unicorn Vampire Hunter is a fairy tale. It's an all ages fairy tale comic about a unicorn who hunts vampires with his horn. It is, I always wanted to tell a fairy tale, and I figured out that what I needed was a kind of silly hook. And then I hired, one of the best artists on the planet, and we made it happen. So if you like fairy tales, if you like vampires and unicorns, you just might like this book.
Yeah, the one of the great keys that you see a lot is it's nice to have a really pithy hook that or high concept that you can get out in a sentence, but it's even better if your hook is your title. And Unicorn Vampire Hunter kind of does that right in the title. So kudos to you for that. So this is the latest launch. Does this collect the full story now? Is it 5 issues in total for at least the first arc or volume?
Yeah, this is the full first arc. So if you back this for the catch up, or if you've been following along, this will wrap up the first storyline. The first storyline.
Great. So this is cool, and thank you for sharing this. And I'm excited to have you on the podcast because I've been sort of watching you do your thing on Kickstarter over the years, and you're someone that's been a storyteller. You sort of feel like for your whole life, but I also saw on your Kickstarter page that it's like only been about 7 years now that you sort of consider yourself as like getting into comics and making comics seriously. And I guess I'm curious, for a lot of the people out there, what do you look back now as like the thing that made you transition from, well, I kind of tell stories on the side, but no, I'm a comic creator and I'm in this world. Like what does it look to make that transition from hobbyist to sort of aspiring pro, et cetera? Like what were sort of the key transition elements for you?
I mean, I think when I very first started out really trying to make comics, there was just a point at which I was like, I always wanted to be a published author, whether that was writing novels or comics or whatever. And at a certain point, I was like maybe 25, and I was like thinking to myself, I always thought when I got older, when I was really an adult, I would do this. And then I was 25 years old, and I was like, well, at what point am I an adult? At what point am I, I was like, what am I waiting for, essentially? Yeah. So that was like the first moment that clicked. And then over the last 7 years, it's really been me really trying to do that. And it, of course, deciding 6 or 7 years ago that I was going to do that didn't mean that all of a sudden, there I was making comics at a professional level, because I definitely wasn't there at the beginning.
Absolutely. So just, as you look at the past 7 years, like what have been some of the sort of breakthrough moments, or what do you sort of see as sort of like in your, relatively young career making comics? Like what are some of the key milestones, or sort of like you look back and it's like, okay, now I'm charting my growth, and these are the things that were like pivot points. Because I think for a lot of creators, there are certain decisions they make, or moments that resonate a little bit more than others in terms of, oh yeah, I'm really in this world now, I'm doing this thing? What were those for you?
I mean, I would say that the first big moment was when I did my first Kickstarter, which I think was in 2017, and that was really exciting. I mean, we raised like $3,000, and probably 2,900 of that was from my family, right?
Right. Yep.
And but that was exciting. But then I would say the next big, really key moment came in 2019 when I had my first failed Kickstarter. Because what I was doing was I had a sci-fi series that was called A Small Favor that I did the classic thing that so many people do where it's like I got my magnum opus right up out the gate. This is going to be, the greatest comic that anyone's ever made. And so I actually launched the first two campaigns on a different account. So this one is my failed one.
Okay.
That I launched. A Small Favor, The Undying Soldier was like the next chapter of this thing, because I had this big magnum opus sci-fi that I was doing, and it wasn't really working. I mean, you get the thing where your friends and family tell you that what you're doing is good because they're your friends and family, and that's what they're supposed to do. But I had a lot to learn, both in terms of storytelling and marketing and everything else. And then I had this failed Kickstarter, and it really spectacularly failed. And
so I want to pause here for a second, because this is an important thing. Like, a lot of people, they'll look at creators that have a big splashy number that they're doing on Kickstarter or whatever, and just sort of assume that like they operate, like the rules of gravity operate differently for some people rather than others. But the truth is, most creators that I know that have great successes, like, there are in their past big mistakes or big things that in their mind like did not work out, that led them there. But so can you talk, like, let's really dive into this, because like I think there are a lot of creators out there that, like, once they decide to get in this world, they're like taking the bull by the horn. I'm running for it. Like, there's no stopping me. I get a little success under my belt, got some momentum. Now let's go for this big thing. Like, what were some of the things that you maybe did not, boxes that didn't get checked, or things that contributed to a failed Kickstarter? And then like, I guess there's also like what were the elements of failure there? What like when you look back at it, like what failed about that Kickstarter in particular?
Sure. Okay. So the biggest thing is that I was really attached to this IP, this idea that meant a lot to me and was very important to me, but wasn't translating. Some people liked it. I always talk about this, and people are like, "Oh, what are you talking about? I liked it. I read that and I thought it was pretty good." But it wasn't. In the end, if it's not, seeing that translation where people keep coming back, then that's like an obvious sign. And I was trying to push something, like push a dying horse a little bit. And there was also, just at that time, I hadn't even dipped my toe into like email lists. I mean, you talk on this podcast all the time about how email is king, right? Like, that's the most important thing. And I had no idea. I was like, I'm going to tweet about it and hopefully people will come. So the whole concept of like killing your babies is something I think about all the time. Because so when I was in high school, I was in a video production class, and I was making this, movie, and a sophomore, Caleb, was making a movie in class, and I had this big fight scene between two characters, and we probably had like an hour of footage, and like every shot I wanted to include. And so, I was editing this video together, and it was like a 30-minute video, and my teacher was like, "Man, you gotta kill your babies here. Like, some of it, we got to cut that way down." And I think about that all the time, because we get attached to things. We get really, really attached to things. And we're not willing to let them go. And that Kickstarter was me being like, this is going to work. This is the thing that I wanted to do, and it's going to work. And I'm going to make it work, even if I have to shove it through a hole that's not meant to go through. And after it failed, a lot of people told me, well, when are you going to relaunch? What are you going to do? How are you going to retool this? And I thought about it, because a lot of people do that, and sometimes it works for them. But I really had to be honest with myself and really think about it. What was working here and what wasn't? Am I connecting with an audience? And so what I did was I put it on a shelf. I was like, I'm not going to decide to kill this right now. I didn't decide to do that for about 2 years later until after that. But I put it on a shelf and I'm like, let's try something different. And the next solo project that I launched was Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which at the time was my most successful solo project ever by a wide margin. And so what that told me was I needed to go in a different direction for a while.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we talked about the importance of pithy log lines and things like that, and just sort of like comparing Unicorn Vampire Hunter, which again, you really don't need anything more than the title, and to A Small Favor, The Undying Soldier. It's like, okay, and then the concept of a space traveler and his AI companion go looking for an immortal soldier who holds the secret to an ancient mystery. It's like, I am positive that in your head and in your mind, you are seeing all of the amazing like stories and mysteries and stuff, cool stuff that you can do in that story. And yet I also remember, I can imagine me with some of the books that are tougher for us to sell at like conventions, trying to like communicate that to people and just seeing it gloss over and just not making that visceral connection. And so yeah, so like I totally can understand where that's going, even though you know, that's not to say that you wouldn't be able to come back and take a new crack at this and find that, you know, find the entry point that's really going to work in the future. But you're absolutely right, like especially early on when you don't have a massive built-in audience, the more direct the hook, the faster that you can connect with people and be like, yeah, I'm into this kind of stuff, tell me more, the more powerful it is. So, you know, kudos to you for pivoting and for not, because I found that like, and I think it's you know, there's the whole principle, there's a principle behind it, but like a lot of times people that have been at this the shortest amount of time are the stubbornest about their creations. It's like, yeah,
True.
you know, but yeah. So talk a little bit about that though. So you put this on the shelf and tried something different, and you know, was the reaction or the new reaction that you got, like, could you tell, like even before you launched, that this thing was going to connect in a way that the previous project did not?
Yeah, and of course, I was so nervous when I was launching the new project. When I launched the first issue of Unicorn Vampire Hunter, I had done, you know, a handful of other things that weren't A Small Favor, that weren't my solo project, and I had contributed to some anthologies and stuff. But this was my next big shot, and I was so nervous because the last one had failed. But just like putting out feelers before I launched it, people were very excited, and then the immediate feedback from people, like, and the most important thing was, it was like people I didn't know who had come on, discovered me, read the first issue, and were sending me messages, sending me emails, sending me messages through Kickstarter saying, when's the next issue coming? You know, we loved this. And it was such a difference to me. It was night and day. I was like, I can't ever go back, because this thing connected with people, and like ultimately we're telling stories because we want to connect with people. We want people to be excited about the stories that we're telling. And I think there's a place for the kinds of stories that like don't make sense and are or don't make sense to everybody, and are like for like only the most passionate fans. And maybe someday, if I'm Neil Stevenson, or if I'm, you know, Brian Michael Bendis or whatever, then I can do then I might do my, you know, my incomprehensible magnum opus at that point, because there will still be people to read it. But something I talk about all the time with other creators is that at our level, the name doesn't sell the book. Our name doesn't sell the book. Every title is its own pitch. But the good news is I didn't totally give up on that project. If anyone's listening and is like, well, damn it, Caleb, you shouldn't have just given up. Like, I didn't. I took that and I turned it into something else, which I would be happy to talk about too.
Yeah, please do. I mean, because a pivot is an important thing, and something I've said on this show before, and something mentors of mine have said before is that, like, if you're committed to this for the long haul, there are no failures along the way. Like, when you go for a goal, even on a platform like Kickstarter that's all or nothing, like, two things are going to happen. You're either going to hit that goal, or you're going to get some new information and learn a lesson that you're going to need along the way to ultimately hit that goal in the future. And so, it's clear you learned a couple of really important goals, or really important lessons that have made it so that, that it was like a $6,000 goal that you had or something like that for the project that didn't hit. And now, like, that's not like, now these other campaigns that you're running are on a different level than that. And
Sure.
So something that was like really hard to hit with what you had is different. And it's sort of like, but Kickstarter is also the platform where you play the game. You get to choose what level you play the game on. Like, there's a world where you could have defined success for that last launch as, hey, getting a $2,000 campaign launch so that I can, help recoup some of the costs of it. Right. And so, but it's an important thing to note that, like, much like if you're trying to dig a hole, right, you can use a spade or you could use an excavator. like both will get you there, but one might be a whole lot easier to or require a lot less effort. And so, at the early stages of your career, what's the sharpest tool that you have? What's the easiest thing to move the needle with? And being willing to go in that direction is important. But yeah, talk a little bit about how you, like, took lessons and pivoted with the project that you had.
Sure. So, a small favor I put on a shelf. It failed, and I thought about relaunching, but I was like, I don't want to do that because I'm not confident that anything will change, and I wasn't willing to set a lower goal. And so I put it on the shelf, and then what I did was I launched a couple other projects, and then over the next 2 years after that, I kept thinking about it. I thought about the stories that I was going to tell with that book and the characters. And so I came up with a new book. My book, called Vampire Detective in Space, is actually really the spiritual successor to A Small Favor. And several of the important main characters from A Small Favor are in Vampire Detective in Space. It's a much smaller story. It's a much more concise story, but it's got a better hook, and it has not been as successful as Unicorn Vampire Hunter. But what it has done is it's been able to scratch my itch of telling that initial story that I wanted to tell with the characters that I wanted to use. And I've had, we talk about, like, relative success. On the last campaign for Vampire Detective in Space, I raised $8,000, and I felt that was, I think, had that happened in 2019, I would have been over the moon. Of course, because I've kind of moved to a higher level now. I had that success, and I was like, oh well, I guess it's not as successful as I thought. But of course, it's still a tremendous success. I was very happy with it.
Yeah, and I think this is something that can be difficult, and why it's so important for us as creators to separate ourselves from the stuff that we create. And it can be very, very difficult to do. But, if you are so tied up in the performances of your launch, and you equate, your own personal value with what any individual project does, you're going to be, all over the place because two projects are not necessarily going to have the same appeal, the same market for the same audience slash Kickstarter fit.
Well, that's that. I mean, that's exactly it. I was talking to Miles Grubb, who does After the Gold Rush, and he was the one who was telling me every project is a different pitch.
Yeah.
When I was doing this project, he was like, "This is a different project, and when you go back to Unicorn Vampire Hunter, it's going to be an explosive success." And then it was. I launched a new one, and I didn't lose anything for having done this other book. In fact, I picked up a larger audience. I have people who backed this Vampire Detective in Space who discovered me through that, who are now coming back to Unicorn Vampire Hunter, and it's all this ecosystem that feeds into it. So
yeah, and that's the other thing. Like, the bigger the success is, right, then the wider the gap sometimes becomes between from one project to the next. And you look at look at Tom Cruise movies, right? Like his last, like Top Gun, like $1 billion, but you can look at a couple of his movies over the past 5 years that didn't come anywhere close to that, and so it is relative. And so it's very important to like psychologically be ready for that. And even some creators that I know you've mentioned sort of looking up to, like Charlie Stickney, like, some of his projects do, they're all very well done. They're all do well, but they don't necessarily all perform at the exact same level. And that's all right. And that has to be expected in going into it. And part of this game is seeing what the audience responds to and trying to give them more of that.
Sure.
And I also like the fact that another way that you as a creator can make the sledding a little bit easier for yourself and reduce the friction is by just having some overlap between one project and another. So obviously having the word vampire in both titles means that the audience that you've already been building for one, that there's at least going to be some interest in the other.
Right.
I think a lot of creators, especially creators that are very creative and have lots of projects and want to play in a lot of different sandboxes, they brush up against that a little bit and try, I don't want to be put in a box. But it is a whole lot easier to be to have one audience that you're really focused on building and selling them the kinds of stuff that you already know they want. So anything else? Did anything else sort of jump out at you as a key lesson from just that transition of evolving that project into something that you knew would be a little bit easier to sell?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, for me, the big takeaway is you got to be willing to let go of things. But letting go doesn't necessarily always mean saying goodbye forever. It just means, really be honest with yourself about what's working and what's not. Because just because we came up with an idea that we love, it's like you said, you can sit at a Comic-Con trying to pitch a book that's hard to sell to someone, and in your mind, it's this vibrant, amazing world. If only they would give it a chance and pick it up and read it, then they would understand. But that's if they have to read it before that happens, then you might have some trouble selling it. And so
it reminds me of my pal John Lees. He had this really great one shot that he wrote that was like I think it was called Rommel and Joe, about a boy and his dog, right? And but just like they pitched it a lot of places and just could not get any momentum with it and kind of shelved it. But over the years, he's been able to sort of do relationship stories with dogs and their owners in some of his other series to really scratch that itch and that heart that is, and by grounding it in series that already had like a different hook, it became even more resonant and connected with people even more because it was reaching people that wouldn't necessarily just go out and buy a book about a guy and a kid and his dog, right? And so ideas, even if they don't work with the first iteration, I think most ideas probably rarely work on their first iteration. So that's a good a good lesson and something to keep in mind. And that work is not necessarily going to go for naught, even if you put a lot of time and energy into it. Right.
Yeah, and if you have like an idea that you believe is really good, it's possible that the execution just wasn't right, and that there's another opportunity for it.
Yeah.
Because if you really, really believed in an idea or a character or whatever, like you're probably not totally wrong. There's probably a gem in there. There's probably something really valuable in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's like many things, it's very hard to keep doing something and not get better at it. And that's why uh, a lot of what I've emphasized with people over the years is to not put any one Kickstarter launch, especially that first Kickstarter launch, on this pedestal of you got to go out and make $1 million with your first launch, because almost nobody, even the people that ultimately do make millions of dollars, almost nobody does. And with their first launch, and it's more about getting out there, building a following, testing what works, and learning from others. But you're also someone that has, as a part of your growth, you've been studying the strategies and connecting with other creators that are having a lot of success on Kickstarter. So can you talk a little bit about who you've been watching, some just high level strategies that you observed that maybe you didn't do on earlier launches, but you apply them to your campaigns, and it's like, holy crap, this is actually working? Like what's some of the great stuff you've been stealing from other creators who, let's be honest, everybody steals strategies and high level stuff from everybody else and applies them and puts their own twist on them. So it's all fair in love and crowdfunding here. But who do you want to shout out, and what are some things that have been really working for you that you've applied?
Well, I mean, the number one person is someone you've had a few times, 2 or 3 times, I think, on your podcast, who's Curtis Clow.
Yeah.
He's a great friend of mine. We talk all the time, but I look at his campaigns as, basically the Bible for how to have that continued evolving success on Kickstarter. If you look at his campaigns, I mean, he started out with this little tiny one just to try out Kickstarter, and then he had several that were like $6,000 to $12,000 campaigns, and now he's doing $50,000 campaigns like regularly.
Yeah.
So honestly, with Unicorn Vampire Hunter, I have been tracking, and comparison is not always healthy, but because I'm talking to him and talking about the strategies that he's been using, I have compared my launches of Unicorn Vampire Hunter to his Beastlands launches, and up until this point, I have actually been a little bit ahead of his curve. Now we'll see, because on his 1 through 5 launch, he made $50,000. Now I don't know if I'll hit that, but that was
that one
incredible
was
success.
Definitely that was a takeoff. That one really went. One thing that I've noticed for your launches, and maybe you can sort of speak to this and tell us what you attribute to this, but it can, like, it's impossible not to compare our own campaigns to past campaigns that we do, like campaigns for different creators. But because so much of Kickstarter is pretty transparent, one of the ways that you can sort of measure the performance of a campaign is average pledge level.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually the number one metric that most advertisers will look at you to talk to you about, because if your average pledge level is not high enough, they can't help you, because
right.
And in a lot of businesses, average pledge level is like, or average customer value is sort of like the holy grail. And if you have two products, but one has a higher average pledge level or average customer value than the other, it's pretty clear that the one has the higher is can spend more to acquire that customer, and becomes tends to be the one that wins. And I noticed, on your first Vampire Hunter project, your average pledge level was about $20.85.
Yep.
For 1 to 3, it's raised to $29. But for your current campaign right now, you're at an average pledge level of $54, which is a huge surge. So
Yeah.
what do you attribute that surge to, and how and was that something that you were like really looking and trying to improve with this latest launch?
Oh, for sure. And that's something I actually talked to Curtis a lot about because in all our conversations, that's what he kept bringing up. I mean, the first thing Curtis taught me was the email list, which, of course, it doesn't need to be said is so important. But then the average pledge, he kept talking to me. He was looking at my campaigns. He's like, your average pledge, it's not high enough. It's not high enough. So I was like, what can I offer? What can I offer on this campaign? This campaign was 100% designed around how can I provide more value to the backers so that my average pledge level is higher. And this, I mean, I'm just straight up using the image of his collector's box that he did because I'm doing a collector's box. It's going to have this amazing painting by Jeremy Treese on it, which is a very high value item. And then I'm offering a role-playing game one-shot, which is essentially another issue's worth of story, but can also be played as a Dungeons and Dragons game that has original art and original story in it. So I'm essentially offering 3 issues on this campaign: issue 4, issue 5, and the role-playing game. And then I've got some variants, and I've got that collector's box, which is a high value add-on. Plus we have because it's 1 through 5, anyone who's jumping in for the first time is going to, if they want the physical level, they're going to be going for that physical catch up. So that's another high value thing that increases the average pledge. And I think that part of just naturally, the longer a series goes, the higher your pledge level is going to be, because those new people coming in are going to be getting more stuff.
Yeah.
But something I've learned from this campaign already is there's a lot you can offer that will just increase that value. But it has to be an increase in value for the customer, right? I can't just jack up my prices. I need to offer more. And so I will say this campaign, I have invested the most. I have raised the most I've ever raised, and I think I'm going to by far raise the most I will have ever raised by the end of it. But I also invested the most by far leading up into the campaign.
And that's not uncommon either. Most of the time to get a different result, you've got to put in different inputs. But it is nice when you get to where you're at with a backlist and with other issues that, you are also dipping into product that you don't have to create again and can sell that to new folks as well. So, very, very cool in terms of that. So, I mean, you mentioned it a couple of times, in getting started with an email list, like what's your approach to email now, and what 1 or 2 strategies are you using to grow that list and to connect with that list?
So right now, and for the past 2 years, I mean, because with the pandemic, I'm starting to go to conventions again. I went to one in June, and I'm going to be going to Emerald City in Seattle, and Rose City in Portland, Oregon, this fall. But those are the first major conventions I've been to in like 3 years. And so the way that I grew it in the meantime was every time I did a launch, I ask everyone it's one of the survey questions: do you want to join my mailing list? And the great thing about those leads are they're really high quality, because they're people who have already paid you for your thing that you're selling.
They are people that are customers with accounts on your #1 sales chat platform.
Exactly.
Which actually makes a really big deal. Like I've like run ads to people that have bought from us on like Amazon, that we've been able to like pull from Amazon, and then my online shop. But the conversion rates to past Kickstarter backers are so much higher than like people that just like to shop other places, and it,
100,
so
100%.
that's great.
So I mean, that's like, honestly, for me, if anyone's asking, like the number one way. I collect emails in other ways. Like I give away like the first issue of the comic for free, and like, you have to give me your email list to download it through BookFunnel. That I collect some emails that way. I collect some emails when I go to shows. I have at this point now, instead of having a physical sign up, I have a QR code. That it's like if you scan the QR code um, and sign up for the list, then
Yep.
I'll give you a free sticker at a show or whatever. And I get a lot of signups that way. But the most high quality signups, 100%, are after the campaign. The people who said, yes, put me on the list. I mean, those are the people that open the emails, and those are the people that click the links in the emails. So that's the first step. And then the other thing I would say that's been helped me be successful is just what I send in the emails. Because the thing that, again, going back to Curtis, his big thing that he always tells me is 80% of the emails have to be, you're not selling anything. Because if I'm on somebody's email list, I want, every time I see that email, I'm hoping that if I click it, I'll see something exciting and new. I'm on an email list for a card game that I really like to play. It's like a major card game. And every time I see an email from them, it's like I know that there's going to be a spoiler for a new card from an upcoming set, and that's exciting. And so it doesn't matter if I can't buy something when I click that email. I know I'm going to get some new information. And so I always try to have some kind of, either when I send out email, there's new pages from a new comic, or there is some new art from something I'm going to be offering, or I'm like sending out a survey asking the people on the list, like, what would they like to see on the next campaign? Anything like that, just to keep people engaged and interested. And if you can keep that email list, the open rate's high, and it doesn't matter how big your list is. I mean, my list is only 1,500 people, but it's powerful. It's a powerful 1,500 people.
Yeah. It's the right 1,500 people. Yeah, that's great. And I think anyone that's been a writer in comics and works with talented people, the rush that you get for when new art hits your inbox, or you see progress made, or a cover comes back. And so if you can just say, hey, wait a minute, if I get that rush and these people are interested in my books, or the kinds of stories that I'm interested in, that I'm making, like, all I got to do is share that process and share some of those teasers along with them. And it's not this big, really, tough communication process that you have to do. It's just keeping people that are your friends, are your people, are your crew in the loop on what's going on. And then, and so that they're used to hearing from you when it's time to come around and launch again. So yeah, I love that. I think you're going about that the right way.
I also believe in, I don't hold a lot of cards close to my chest. The way I write my stories and the way I communicate with backers is like, I'm just going to share cool stuff with them. I mean, I'm not going to send them the whole issue, but it's going to, I'm going to share a lot of art. I'm not worried about spoilers. I always do fully lettered previews on my Kickstarters because I want people to see what I'm selling, and I want people to see the product because I'm excited about it. And, if they want to see more stuff, I'm just going to show them more stuff.
Absolutely. Any other creators or strategies or things that you're trying out that have worked for you that you want to shout out?
Well, just in terms of creators that I talk to, like, there's big names like Pat Shand is having like insane explosive success right now.
Yeah.
With his latest campaign. I mean, I can't even believe it. And he's always been a really, really cool dude. I often, if I'm having issues, will go and chat with him, and he always has good advice. And then Charlie Stickney is someone who's always been very helpful. David Byrne, and then there's also, but I mean, I'm talking about people who are like way up here in the stratosphere, and so I think one of the most important things to do as a creator is talk to the people who are like on your level, because those, we're all in this together, like a rising tide. But if I'm talking to, I mean, if I'm just trying to talk to, Brian Bendis, I'm a little guy, and he he doesn't, if he's going to help me out, that's great because he's a nice guy, but he doesn't have a lot to gain by helping me out. You know, he's not down in the trenches with me. And so, you know,
and it just so happens that the people that are or that are on Brian Bendis' level that he does talk to are all people that he was in the trenches with, doing those conventions with back in the day when nobody
right.
knew their stuff either. So yeah, that's absolutely the case, you know. And
So
yeah, go ahead. No.
Well, I was gonna say the people that I am really chatting with a lot right now. I mean, I do talk to Pat Shane, I talk to Curtis Clow, I talk to Miles Greb, and those guys are great friends of mine. But I'm also chatting with people like Alan Dunford, who's doing Hocus Hocus, which is one of my favorite books. It's like a Faustian fantasy thing. He's on Kickstarter right now. Mike Tiener does a whole ton of books through Bad Bug. And those guys are great friends of mine. And I like, to me, that's like, we're in the trenches together and we're comparing strategies all the time, trying new things out. And I could go on and list like a ton of people, but it's, just like making friends with people that you can collaborate with is a big deal, and not just like, trying to make friends with the stars,
Yeah. I mean, that's a great thing. But I guess I would ask, because I know that I think the comics world tends to attract a higher percentage of introverts than not. And also, I've been dropping my boy off at summer camp every day and he's 4, and, making new friends is not, it's not easy at 4, but it's also not easy at 30 or 40. And so I guess any tips or things that, or ways that have worked for you to just, how do you go about making a connection to a creator that you see doing cool stuff, but you're not necessarily, but like, how do you do that? Like what's worked for you?
I mean, number one thing is I just message people. I mean, on Facebook, if you have mutual friends with someone within the comics community, my experience is if you have a bunch of mutual friends, like people are just going to accept your friend invite. And then, just start talking to people or send them a message on Kickstarter. Most of the people that I'm friends with, I just started talking to. I mean, Curtis Clow is like someone who I had seen him on Kickstarter having some success back when he was doing the first few issues of Beastlands, back when someone raising $10,000 on Kickstarter was like amazing to me.
Yeah.
And I saw him at Rose City Comic Con, and I just walked up to him and I'm like, hey, what up, dude? I saw your stuff. And at that time I was, the most I'd ever raised was like $3,000 or $4,000 on Kickstarter. I was like not well known, but he was like just ready to be my friend right off the bat. And I think most people are. We all are introverts. That's true. But I think we all want to be friends. And I think that if you're nervous about approaching someone at a con or online, like just don't go into it asking them for something.
Yeah.
Because if you go into any interaction with someone who you have seen having some success and say, would you promote my project, or would you do this, or go to an artist and say, would you work on my book, and have a 50-50 split? And I don't know, you don't know who I am, but let's be partners. Like, just don't do that. Just be friends. Talk to them about what they're doing. Because we all want to talk about our own stuff, and we all want to be friends. And if you're, it can be nerve-wracking, but what I've learned over the years is the best way to approach it is open that Facebook Messenger, like, Charlie Stickney, what up, Charlie? Like, I saw your latest book was doing amazing. Like, and then that starts a conversation. Or just anybody, just talk to them, because we want to be friends.
Yeah. And the creative life tends to be a kind of a loner or lonely most of the time, sort of at the computer, working on the script, at the drawing table, at the, in Photoshop. And so people really do appreciate connecting with other people who are weird in the same way that they're weird. So just sort of get over it, take that extra leap. Because good things are on the other side of that. I think that's great advice. Well, yeah, I mean, amazing stuff here, Caleb. The project, as we're live here, is 23 days to go. Hundreds of backers are already there. A lot more to come over the next few days. Now you're starting to head into sort of like the mid stretch, the difficult periods. Do you have any strategies or things that you're planning to roll out to keep the momentum going, or just any teasers to get people that are checking this out that might be on the fence to jump in? What works for you?
A number of things. I mean, I do things like go on podcasts, and I also do cross promotions. I'm doing a cross promotion with the Pocus Hocus guys. We did a crossover print where, in fact, as soon as we're done talking here, I'm going to do an update on my Kickstarter about that. We did the artist for Pocus did a print of the character from that book and the character from my book fighting vampires, which is fun. And just regular crossover promotion, or I mean, cross promotions where we shout each other's books out is always helpful. And then I keep pinging that email list, and people get, if you have an email list and you're worried that if you send out too many emails, like people will be mad at you, just remember the fact that those people self-selected into your email list, and they have the unsubscribe option at any time. As long as you're sending them interesting things, if it's the same email, if it's like, my Kickstarter is live right now, go back my Kickstarter, and that's all that every email is, then yeah, they're probably going to be annoyed. But they want the emails from you. They sign up for them because they want them. And so
right. And especially if you're filling your email list with a lot of Kickstarter backers, and you're playing a stretch goal game, like, they want the campaign to be as successful as possible. So I think that's great advice too, as well. So keep it going.
The lull period that everyone talks about is, I will say, everything is relative, and as you get to a higher level, it feels less bad. I like this. Almost sounds like bragging, but I almost never have $0 days anymore on my Kickstarters. I mean, I have low days. Certainly there is that lull period, but it's just part of it. Of course, the first day and the last few days are going to be the gigantic days, and that's part of it. So, I would say if you're out there and you're running a campaign right now and you're in the middle and it's lulling, just don't lose heart, because it happens to literally everyone.
Absolutely. And I've always noticed, like, that a cool thing is that even if your campaign, like, it's slowing down, or the backers are few and far between, that follower notice keeps going up. And
it does.
So you want to keep the momentum, you want to keep putting out the messaging, you want to keep tweeting, because sometimes that action is just setting up the big finish. And so, I know there are some creators that are like, well, why am I even bothering doing anything in the middle if nobody's going to back? I just focus on the beginning and focus on the end. You could try that, but a lot of times, people need to be exposed to your stuff repeatedly in different ways, in different formats, with different images, before they finally jump in and back you when that clock urgency is back on the final stretch. So keep the momentum going, keep your excitement going.
You can also, if you want the boost of knowing that people are looking at your campaign, then sign up for Google Analytics, and because I do that, and I can look and see in the last 5 minutes how many people have literally been looking at that campaign, and that's helpful. And watching that, like you said, watching that follower count go up, because I would have to look at mine, but I'm sure it's in the 600 or 700s or something right now in terms of how many people have clicked that button. So they'll all be getting emails, at the 48-hour mark and everything.
Yeah, and that can be really huge for a strong finish. Well, this is great, Caleb. I'm glad that we got to connect and talk about your project. A lot of good insights for creators here. What's the best way outside of Kickstarter for people to connect with you or follow what you're doing?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I'm really good at the email list. I'm really bad at social media, but you can find me at Caleb Palmquist on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook at I have a Unicorn Vampire Hunter Facebook page, and unicornvampirehunter.com is always going to redirect to whatever the most relevant thing is for the series. But in terms of finding me on social media, it's going to be Instagram and Facebook are going to be the best ways. Just at my name.
All right, we'll make sure we'll link that up, and we'll send everyone to check out Unicorn Vampire Hunter on Kickstarter while it's there. Thanks so much for your time, Caleb, and thanks everybody for checking out this interview and checking out this project. Good stuff.
Thanks.